I'm Jill Angelo, host of the Geneve podcast series for women's health in midlife. I speak with the most forward-thinking experts in the health and wellness industries. These experts are helping women 40 plus feel confident and in control of their health in the most vibrant years of their lives. So join us on this journey of women's health. Lauren Chiren is founder, principal coach, and change catalyst for executive coaching organization Women of a Certain Stage. Having had personal experience with the impact menopause can have on a woman, she dedicated herself to coaching female executives to maintain peak performance throughout the change. She also works with businesses, providing executive coaching and team management training to help them better understand and support their female staff. You can find her at womenofacertainstage.com. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us today. I'm really excited about this topic because we know, at least specifically in the U.S., 20% of our workforce are women in menopause or in the menopause stage of life. And so I think this is an incredibly important topic. First of all, can you start by explaining what you do with Women of a Certain Stage, your organization, and why your services are so needed?
Sure. Well, I went through a short, nasty menopause in my early 40s and left a senior role at work thinking I had early onset dementia. So I realised if that had happened to me, that potentially I wasn't the only person out there that happened to. So the key thing that I started out doing was working with women and coaching them through on lifestyle so that they could really understand how they can take responsibility for their menopause and help manage the symptoms that they're experiencing hand in hand with any medical need they may or may not need. And that's grown now so that I split my time three ways. So with organisations, educating them on menopause so that they can become menopause savvy and supportive, with women one-to-one and in groups, and then also by doing talks and reaching out to the media to help spread the word about menopause and raise awareness on it.
It sounds like you're then working both with women on coaching them, but then also working with the leadership in the workplace to make the workplace a better place for women in menopause to thrive. Can you talk a little bit about why you do both? What came first, and why is it led to where it is?
So I initially started by coaching women because I felt that that's what I would have needed when I was going through my experience. And I wanted to do something so that nobody went through what I did. So I working one-to-one with women, coaching them, and I also ran monthly what we used to call a moment of me time. So Sunday morning for 3 or 4 hours, we'd have a health chat, we would have some food, or we'd make some food, we'd do a relaxation session and an exercise session as well. And it just gave women some head space and some physical space to be themselves without any other interventions or any other pulls in their time. And that's where it all started from. And that grew into me realising that not everybody could afford to pay for services and for help and support, but women need to talk. So I set up menopause socials, which I run every month, and I do pop-ups. So by pop-up, I mean that I do periodic ones around the country and in the US. And I have a regular one here in Bristol where I live. So it's the first Sunday of every month. People can turn up for free. There's no selling. There's no pressure on anybody. It's just an open, free, safe space for people to come along and share their experiences with each other. And then as a result of those interventions, I was being asked by women, how can they help themselves at work, and how can they help their employers understand what they're going through? So that led me to meeting up with one of the companies I used to work with, and we did a big launch in London, in the city, which was incredible. It was oversubscribed as soon as it was launched, and there were people turning up, men and women, on the day just to find out about this weird thing called menopause. And as a result of that, it gave me the confidence to start approaching other organisations and asking what they were doing and how they were supporting their menopausal women.
That's incredible. A couple things I got to just dig into there. First and foremost, these Sunday sessions where you would have women come and just talk. Did you ever find, now culturally it might be a little bit different in the UK versus the US. Did you ever find it challenging to get women to feel comfortable enough to come and talk about it in a group? Is my first question.
That's a great question. So I was absolutely blown away by the response. I wasn't sure who would come because it was free, and I didn't know whether people that were in the Facebook groups that I'm part of, or whether by using some of our ticketing agencies to advertise it would be a good enough way to get out there. And within literally a week of announcing that I was going to do this, I found myself in the local newspaper, national newspaper, on the local radio, on the local TV, and before I knew it, I had a room packed full of women who were very grateful to discover that they are not alone.
Fantastic. That's really incredible. And I think the bigger question or the bigger surprise in my mind is you talked about your launch in London and that you oversubscribed in terms of people from the workplace coming, men and women. Talk a little bit about, was it hard to get them to come? What got them over the hump to say, yep, this is something we need to talk about? And culturally in the UK, is it acceptable to talk about in the workplace, or is that something you're changing as well?
I believe that when I started out in this journey 4 years ago, that people didn't talk about menopause at all, let alone in the workplace. However, when the firm that I teamed up with, at the time they had 120,000 employees, and they had to select who was going to be invited to the event. So we targeted women aged 45 to 55 and line managers of women aged 45 to 55. We were absolutely overwhelmed to find out that people were finding out about it and asking, can they please come, even though they hadn't been invited. So there was no getting anyone over the hump. It was just pure, total and utter relief that their organisation was finally talking about this topic.
I think that's incredible. How do you get the conversation going in a meeting like that?
I think the fact that everyone in the room is so relieved to find out they have colleagues going through the same experience, that they're no longer alone. They're only too willing to share their experiences and then explain what it is that they need. If you go into any organisation, the employees will tell you what it is that they need to make their lives easier. They're very, very happy to have an opportunity. It's not like pregnancy where people get time off. It's not like pregnancy where people can see a bump grow, and it's typically, not always clearly, but typically got a beginning, a middle and an end, and there's usually policies and organisations around that. Menopause doesn't have such a neat beginning, middle and end, and people don't really want to know about the unpleasant side of people's hormones. So usually if I'm running events with organisation, first of all, we will get some key stakeholders involved across the business, make sure that we've got people championing what they're about to do. We'll typically put some newsletters out with some just facts and figures, and then on the launch events we'll go into things like line management training. We'll do menopause social events, like I mentioned earlier, that I do myself outside of the workplace. We will do menopause facts and figures. I'll share some case studies of women that are very impacted, not so impacted, not impacted at all, and explain how certainly for women who are not impacted, it can be quite challenging for them to watch other colleagues going through it because they haven't had that personal experience. And also working a lot with younger colleagues as well, because 100% of women are going to go through menopause if they live that long, and 100% of the people around them are going to be impacted by it. So there's nothing niche about this. So there's lots of different types of trainings. You can leave videos, you can do fact sheets, you can change policies, you can change lots of different things in the workplace to help support your women so that they can flourish.
So what does a menopause optimized workplace look like?
Wow, what an incredible expression. I love that. Menopause optimized workplace. So for me, a menopause optimized workplace would be an organisation that has got understanding from the moment that someone advertises a job, that there's language in there that shows that it's a completely inclusive organisation and it welcomes diversity into the workplace, all the way through the recruitment process, that they would have within the initial induction training and the ongoing training information about menopause, and being able to signpost where people can go to get advice, help, support, and even just basic information about menopause, whether you're someone going through it or you're managing someone or you're being managed by someone going through menopause. You would also have, for the women, you might have things called, you might have some flexibility around the absence policy, so that they might have a set number of days throughout the year that they're allowed to take off unpaid, but they can take those days off without impacting their performance review, or may, be allowed to come in later. You want to have women sitting where there's natural light in cool conditions, and have somewhere that they can go and have a shower if they need to throughout the day, just quickly nip in and freshen up. You want it to be acceptable to have a fan on your desk. You want fans to be provided by the organisation. And you want to be able to know that you can talk to your line manager or your colleagues about it. They would also run menopause socials on a monthly basis so that women know they've got support, and they'd have someone in there doing health and lifestyle coaching with them so that they can maximise their own personal management of their menopause as well. And they would probably also have medical advice available as well, or prescriptions where that's appropriate too.
As you talk to the business leaders, are there actual business-oriented results or impacts of doing this beyond, I think, the apparent, which is, diversity and inclusion of a base of employees, but are there also business impacts that you've started to talk about and or see in the clients that you're working with?
Yeah. So if we go back to some of the UK stats, which aren't too different in the States, although it's not recorded terribly well in either country, there's a spike in women entering disciplinary process, performance management process, for the first time in their lives between the ages of 45 and 55. There's a spike in suicide attempts of women aged 51. And there's a spike in divorce aged 45 to 55 in the UK as well, which again, the stats aren't too dissimilar in the States. So it's interesting that if you think that those factors put together all map onto the typical time when a woman's going through menopause, very often if she feels that she's not being supported at work, she'll leave. Or she'll go off in long-term sick, and eventually the business will have to come to an arrangement that she leaves. So they are financially going to be impacted by having to replace her, by having to backfill her while she's off not performing, not being in the business. There will be an impact to service level performance, and they may even have to pay the woman off. So if you take someone that's earning £150,000 and she's off work for 6 months on full pay, plus she's got a payment for her to leave without any contention, plus all the knock-on impacts of her not being present in the business, then there's quite a significant financial impact, economical impact to women being off. Also, a lot of women will tend to be present. So we have an expression over here called presenteeism, whereby you're present in work, but you're not effective. Because you feel like you can't take time off. You feel you must turn up. But quite often people will be present, and that can be actually more damaging to service level delivery in a business than being off for a shorter period and actually, getting yourself to a place where you're more able to perform. So there's very definitely an economic impact. There is an Equality Act over here, Equality Act 2010. So that's covering sexism, ageism, and disability in the workforce. And there are requirements under each of these that can potentially cover a woman going through menopause under certain conditions. So there's a legal case as well for it. And quite frankly, as more women are working longer and later into life, certainly in the UK, women aged 50 plus are the fastest growing cohort of employees in the UK. So without these women fulfilling these roles, we won't have a fully engaged workforce. We'll have too many vacancies. So there's all sorts of angles that you can look at it from.
I think all those things that you called out are incredibly powerful. It's a lot to think about and to remember. How do you coach the women you work with who don't necessarily have menopause awareness or don't have this menopause optimized workplace? How do you coach them to drive this kind of conversation with their manager or with leadership or human resources is what we call them in the United States, but how would you coach them to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, it's very much around, first and foremost, women have to take responsibility for the fact that they're going through menopause and making sure they're doing everything in their power to help themselves. It's not someone else's problem and it can't be passed off. So once they're in a position where they're doing everything that they possibly can, then it's just about, creating time and space and making an appointment to speak to either human resources or your line manager, whichever, is appropriate. Making sure that you've spent a little bit of time making a diary of how your symptoms are impacting you, so that you can go along and explain how your menopause is impacting you, because with over 34 symptoms, we're all affected differently and no two people are the same. Clearly there are commonalities, and that's why we have a lot of stereotypes around menopause, but it's just working with someone and helping. So I will work with someone to raise their confidence, increase their resilience, make sure that they are, being well hydrated, they're nourishing themselves with positive relationships, good stresses, not negative stressors, making sure that they are, getting outdoors, moving their bodies, and just building them up so that they're in a place where they want to go into work and they want to do the very best they can, and they can hold that sensible conversation so that they can get the right support that they need.
I love what you said at the start of that around women just recognizing that they are going through this transition and calling it out and being okay with it. Do you, once you even, I think, bring that to the women that you work with, are you seeing any benefits of menopause in these women around how it's setting them up from a confidence perspective for the second half of life? Or do you see any new skills or capabilities coming out of them throughout this transition?
Typically, I find with many of my clients that we have a big belief that we're coming into our wisdom, that we have so many life skills, knowledge and experiences under our belt now. We are in a place where we are giving back. We do typically still have responsibilities for children or grandchildren, which perhaps previous generations didn't have the same level of responsibility. So we're a bit of a sandwich generation. So I'm seeing women trying to juggle an awful lot more than women have ever done before. So quite often women will come out of a job and they'll set up a business on their own. Quite often, they're no longer worrying about some of the monthly cycle stuff that they've had to worry about before. And certainly with, there's a definite confidence uplift on the other side of menopause. If someone had told me, 4 years ago I'd be sitting here having this conversation with you, I'd have laughed, let alone standing on stage in front of 1,000 people and talking about menopause. I wouldn't have even said the M word out loud. So yes, I definitely see a surge in confidence and a surge in women going after what they want, because their nurturing, caring days are largely, the hormones are having a different impact on our body. So we're not so much looking after everyone else. We're more out there to look after ourselves and see what we can do to inspire and generate for the wider community.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I think everything you've taken us through today is insightful, especially here in the United States, because I think we lag, I think, some of the progress that you've made in the United Kingdom. And I know that you are working to bring your work here to the U.S., and we're excited about that. So if women want to learn more, or employers that might be listening to this want to learn more, it's Women of a Certain Stage. Your website is of the same name?
womenofacertainstage.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing your experience in your program and the progress that you're making with us. Really, really great work. So glad you're doing it. And thanks again for joining us today. Thanks to Lauren Chiren, founder of Women of a Certain Stage, for taking the time to talk with me about how we can build menopause-optimized workplaces to support and retain some of our most valuable employees, women. And thanks to you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for listening to the Gennev podcast series. We welcome your feedback at gennev.com. That's GENNEVE.com. You can follow us on Facebook and subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher, and you'll never miss an episode. The Gennev podcast series is produced by Shannon Perry, theme music by Smitty. And until next time, watch the Gennev website for new stories and offers, all dedicated to women's midlife health.